Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of SALTO Digital Dialogues. We are just coming in SALTO Digital off the heels of a big event in Helsinki, so we have met all of the digital contact points in over 40 NAs over Europe for the first time during the last 2 days. So very exciting stuff, and probably we can talk about this also in future digital dialogues. Now, in case you haven't been here before, just some practical information on how the digital dialogues work. So all sessions are recorded and recordings will be shared online after the fact. If you are wondering why you cannot enable your camera or enable your microphone, that is by design. So we will only in the end, in the Q&A session, you have a chance to turn on your cameras. But we do hope that you are very active in asking questions via either the Q&A section, where we will then take your questions and ask them from our presenters and guest speakers. And also you can just write the questions in the chat and we will take that into account as well. If you think why I'm stepping over here, so I'm letting more people in to the webinar as people are filing in. All materials related to the things that we are listening about today, they will be shared on our house-based environment where you can then access them. And the recording of the sessions will also be available on Housebase, but you can also share the direct YouTube link once it's there. We have to do some minor editing to remove the names of participants, etc., to blur some parts of the video. But that's a minor thing, and so the recording should be available very, very soon after the fact. Now I see also my colleague Jaakko has arrived, so he will be handling the back end of the chat today, responding to any of your questions while I'm acting as the acting host here. So the content is aimed for all national agency staff on all sectors, because we in SALTO Digital work cross-sectorally. This is meant as a tool for you to understand the topic a bit deeper. So hopefully you will get a lot out of this. In case there is something that is kind of unclear or fuzzy, or you're thinking, how does this relate to our NA reality, I encourage you to ask questions from the speakers. Now that we have them here, and additionally in the house space community, which you have all been invited to, where you have access to this seminar, you are also able to continue discussing the topic there. Yeah. And we welcome really this ideas for future sessions. We have one more session coming up this spring, which will be on digital inclusion. So we will be joined by both inclusion SALTOs, both for the youth field and also the education and training sector. And we will talk about what digitalization and digital transformation means as an enabler or possibly also kind of a hindrance or a risk for further inclusion of participants and learners and young people. Yeah. Oh, stay tuned, that will be an interesting session as well. But if you have an idea of something that you feel that should be covered in the starting into autumn and the next 6 months then until the end of the year, do write down for us either here in the chat or in the house space so we can get started. So today, as you know, we are talking about artificial intelligence, and we are looking at it from two a bit differing perspectives. So first, we will be joined by Maria. I will let her introduce herself from the European Commission, talking about the AI and data use guidelines. I hope I remembered that wording correctly. That have come out of the Digital Education Action Plan. And she will explain it a bit, explore it a bit, and you will have then a chance to give questions for her as well. And after Maria, we will be joined by Veronica, who is talking about research bit into how the youth field is connecting with AI processes, AI governing processes. Shapers and shakers, was that the headline? Yeah, I believe so, or maybe other way around. But Veronica will grab you after the next half an hour. So without further ado, next I would give the floor out to Maria, if you are ready. So I will stop sharing my screen here. Also turn off my camera so you have the center stage. All yours.
Hello, Juha. Hi, everyone. I would like to thank you for the invitation to join you here today. I sincerely hope it is going to be an interesting event today. Let me share my screen and then we can start our discussion. Okay, is it visible?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, good. So today I have been invited here by Juha and the colleagues in the SALTO digital team to present and discuss the ethical guidelines we developed in the European Commission. Back in October 2022, about 8 months ago, we presented the guidelines on the ethical use of AI and data in teaching and learning for educators. This document is actually the first of its kind across the European Union, relating artificial intelligence with educational settings. Just to start a little bit, from the more general aspect, in case some of you in the group do not know a lot about it. I will talk just for a few seconds about the Digital Education Action Plan. This is an initiative of the European Commission taking place between 2021 and 2027. It actually includes 13+1 actions, and it is part of a bigger approach, a bigger vision that the European Commission has about education and the digital transition within educational settings. Just to let you know, the Digital Education Action Plan is closely related and it is a part of the European education area that we somehow envision by 2025. And of course, it also relates and draws or feeds the European Year of Skills that is currently ongoing, 2023. We, of course, draw a lot of information and we also relate closely to the Declaration of the Digital Rights and Principles that the European Union published last December. And of course, we also related to the next generation EU, which is our vision for the next generations and how they will achieve a green and digital transition towards a better future for them. And of course, we are always based and relate quite closely to the Better Internet for Kids strategy. Maybe some of you have already heard about the Safer Internet for Kids. It's a series of initiatives and actions we are taking in order to make sure that children and teenagers are using the internet in the most effective but also safe manner. And of course, all of them somehow relate to the digital decade and the targets we have set for 2030. So you see, this is like a holistic approach and we are just part of a continuous whole that the European Commission envisions for the digital transition. Just to let you know a little bit about the DEAP, the Digital Education Action Plan, we have set 2 priorities in DEAP. The first priority is to develop an ecosystem where stakeholders related to digital education will be able to meet, exchange, prepare funding opportunities and form partnerships and collaborations. This ecosystem is highly supported, of course, by our digital education hub. You are free to join. Please register if you haven't done so. It is a wealth of resources and a wealth of meeting points and exchange of information among more than 2,000 people right now. And the second priority, going along with this ecosystem and the hub we have created, relates to digital skills and competences and how every person across the European Union will not stay behind in this rapid digital transition the entire globe is going under. I will not analyze each of the actions in the Digital Education Action Plan, but I would like to draw, let's say, the attention to Action 6 of the Digital Education Action Plan that relates to AI and data use in education and training. This is the action I'm working on. And it's the main focus within which we develop the guidelines, but we are also working on other topics and other initiatives related to AI. Apart from this action, another action that is worth mentioning here is Action 10, which relates to the European Digital Competencies Framework. The European Commission in the previous decade developed this competencies framework for digital skills and competencies, and last year, in March, we actually had an updated version of this framework. We are now in version 2.2. That also includes all the latest technological developments like data and AI in education, augmented and virtual reality, gamification, and so on. I think it is worth having a look at the new revised version as well, as it highly relates to what we are going to talk about today. So let's say, without any further ado, let's move to our topic. What flared Action 6? Three key elements were the main elements that drove us towards the decision to have Action 6 and work on AI. The first one is that we realized that even though there is no national strategy in any of the member states related to AI in education, gradually we noticed that member states started working with AI, started integrating it, at least partially, in their educational context and settings, and they also started applying for e-twinning or Erasmus grants that related to AI projects. So that increasing interest, not only in funding opportunities, but also in strategies related to AI, was the first incentive. The second incentive had to do with the fact that we also noticed from our literature reviews and studies and our collaboration with international organizations like OECD, UNESCO, and United Nations, and the World Bank, that AI has a great potential to enhance education. We all realize, of course, that along with opportunities come risks and concerns, but we see a great potential and we would somehow like to harvest this potential, always in a legal and an ethical manner. And the third thing we noticed had to do with the labor market. We noticed that gradually the labor market started adding AI in job vacancies, in requests and expectations from the workforce. So we noticed that AI should actually be a part of digital skills that every citizen should gradually be acquiring. So this labor market, let's say, the interest from teachers and educational stakeholders in grants and national strategies, along with the potential, were all the incentives to start working more closely and following up on AI. So, of course, apart from this, let's say, competencies framework and Erasmus Plus projects, I must mention here that we also draw and relate to other EU policies and regulations. So back in 2019, we already had ethical guidelines for trustworthy AI that are going hand in hand, as I said, with an assessment list for trustworthy AI. It's quite famous for the acronym ALTAI. So both of them give some sort of steering guidance, steering questions, and some guidelines on how to use AI in numerous fields. They are not education specific, but they can also be applied in education in a broader sense. Of course, the European Commission already prepared the AI Act. It has not been adopted yet, but we are on our way there to be adopted, and it's going to be the first ever AI regulation for the member states. And of course, we also have some other regulations that have already been adopted, like the Data Act, Data Governance Act, GDPR, the Digital Market Act, the Digital Services Act, and so on. If you have a look at all these regulations, they create a whole, a continuum that somehow frames legally and ethically the use of AI in all aspects of human activity. So, At some point, drawing from all of this, we developed the ethical guidelines as mentioned. So the main goals of these guidelines is to foster an understanding of what we mean when we talk about AI in education. We give a definition of what is AI and what is AI specifically in education. How can you use it? What is the purpose of adding AI in education? Is there really a purpose? Do we really need AI in education? So we try to identify use cases and purposes. So not only that we, let's say, we follow this trend of using AI in every domain, but we also have a purpose for it. Why do we do it? We also, of course, underpin some ethical considerations and requirements that I will present later on. And we also gave some guiding examples to teachers so that they can somehow have questions to reflect on when they are practicing tools and they are introducing them in their educational settings and, asking from underage people to use them. And of course, we also mapped some developing emerging competencies. Just to give you a very brief idea, we started working on the topic on June 2021 when we formed an expert group on AI, and the guidelines were published in October 2022. In between these months, more or less 14 to 15 months, we consulted teachers, educational stakeholders, Ministry of Education representatives, Commission and other institution services, international organizations. We had a series of dialogues and consultations and workshops in order to have everyone's attention and everyone's consent on what we were preparing. So as you can see, it was a very holistic work with thousands of people being consulted and expressing their views on the topic. And then we reached the point where we presented the guidelines. These guidelines have 6 chapters, if I can call them chapters. They are 6 parts. The parts that are always there and we consider them highly valuable was the glossary of terms. We realized that in order to discuss about AI in education, all of us need to have in mind a mental representation of the same thing. So we created a glossary of terms so that when we talk about one term, everyone understands the same thing more or less. And of course, we connected it to EU policy on AI so that people will know that these ethical guidelines are not the only thing they have in their toolkit when they want to use AI. We have a series of flows they can use and also find coverage and backup in case they have any doubt. But the 4 main chapters that we added include examples of artificial intelligence and data use in education, ethical consideration, guiding questions, and emerging competencies. Starting from the examples, I would like to mention that these guidelines target mainly teachers and educational staff in formal education. They address early childhood, primary and secondary and vocational education and training. It's not that they cannot be applicable in higher education, but higher education is mainly focused on research. And for this part, another service of the European Commission, RTD, has developed on-demand guidelines for researchers. So somehow our work is complementary. We cover the education and training part, and RTD is covering on-demand with their guidelines, the research part. So we mainly address these stakeholders, but honestly, if a teacher, a parent, or a policymaker wants to read the guidelines, I think they will also gain insights and gain knowledge by reading the guidelines. So, first and foremost, we identified some categories where AI can be used. AI can be used when we support students in their learning, when we support teachers in the preparation of their work, and when we support a system that facilitates the learning and teaching process. And of course, we have an additional category, which comes a little bit on its own. The first one, student teaching. Starting from the first one, student teaching, we mainly talk about applications that support learning by its own. It means that a student can actually get a tablet or a laptop and use a language learning application out of the numerous that already exist, which will gradually learn from the student's mistakes, identify the gaps in the learning process, and self-regulate the learning of the student. Apart from these language learning applications, we also have the dialogue-based and the intelligent tutoring systems. Dialogue-based tutoring systems are more or less what you might have heard as chatbots or generative AI, intelligent tutoring systems like the one that is currently widely available. So what happens with these systems is that they start having a dialogue with the student, and it's only a student system dialogue where each one can learn things and gain information and insights about the other, the system and the student, and gradually they discover learning points. This is for self-regulated student teaching most of the times. But the other categories which are more important to us are student supporting and teacher supporting. A system that supports a student to learn more usually involves an exploratory learning environment that might also be using virtual reality and 3D representations. The teacher is most of the times, if not always, present in this exploratory learning process, where, for example, students have the opportunity in a virtual environment to decompose the human body into its different organs and systems, or to learn more about the universe by pointing and focusing on a specific part of the universe, on a specific galaxy, and so on. It is a great opportunity and a visually attractive opportunity for students to become more engaged and learn in a highly interactive manner. Apart from this, we have also identified the formative writing assessment, which is usually in the form of online quizzes that provide not only a result, but also specific feedback about the gaps and the mistakes a student made. And of course, AI-supported collaborative learning. For example, splitting a classroom into groups according to the needs or the levels of the student or to the specific tasks they need to perform each day in each lesson. In terms of teacher supporting, we have also identified some categories, including the summative writing assessment, what you call essay scoring, which is quite frequent, I would say. We also identified something which is very useful, student forum monitoring. In this case, a system can actually inform a teacher about foul language or biased and discriminatory sentences and words in a forum where students exchange. This is a great opportunity for a teacher that might miss a point, miss something in an exchange in a forum, to identify if there are cases of bullying or discrimination, and like an early warning or alarm system that can help the teacher prevent such behaviors at an early stage. Of course, we have what we call the AI teaching assistants, and we have the pedagogical resource recommendation, which is also gaining ground lately. Some AI systems are able to target online resources on a specific lesson that the teacher is going to prepare for the next day, and provide individualized suggestions to the teacher according to the needs of every student, to the gaps, the knowledge gap the students might have, and so on. This is highly functional and operational and very helpful for a teacher in order to select the best possible resource for the best possible scenario and case or a person and his needs that he has at a specific point. And of course, we have identified system supporting, where most of the times we have what we call educational data mining, where we can have learned analytics coming from student absences, student assignments, student groups, or timetables, and so on. We can also diagnose learning difficulties, especially in written and creative essays or in forums, which is also very easy, makes the work of the teacher much easier, actually, to identify some learning difficulties that he might miss or he might not be certain about. This can be like an additional support tool to assist teacher diagnose something. And the latter is the guidance services, which we also like quite a lot, which can map, let's say, the students' competencies, create profiles for students according to the skills, knowledge, and competencies they have gained, and also match these with specific courses, make recommendations on additional tasks and additional activities a student might need in order to improve his performance or to gain additional skills that he's lacking behind, and so on. So these are all the examples that we have mapped and the categories on the use of AI in education. Of course, these examples are not exhaustive and the categories are not exclusive either. We will be enhancing and following up on this constantly as education technology progresses. However, in order to use all of these systems effectively in the classroom, you need to take four things at least into account. Human agency relates to what a person is doing. Every system is not acting on their own. A person selects this system, introduces it into a school, and then a student uses the system. Both the teacher and the student, perhaps sometimes even the other educational stakeholders or parents, they have the human agency to make selections. These selections on what to use and how to use it and for what purpose should always be justified. This is why we talk about justified choice. Every person has some responsibility of their actions, and you should be able to justify what you did and why you did it and for what purpose. Of course, we always suggest that these the human agency and justified choice are always made within a humane and fair context, because humanity and fairness is what actually distinguishes from AI systems. And that's why we will always need a teacher and a parent and even a student or a stakeholder to be engaged in this process. Following these considerations, we also apply the 7 key requirements for using AI systems legally, ethically, and effectively. Among them, they are all based on ALTI, and among them, we have identified, as mentioned, human agency and oversight, transparency on what is happening, how it is happening, and how a result is coming out and it is transparent, respect to diversity and non-discrimination and fairness, of course, taking into account also the societal and environmental well-being. If an AI system compromises the digital well-being of a person, personal, emotional, physical, psychological, this AI system shouldn't even be considered as an option to be used. We really need to take well-being into account, and of course, we also need to make environmentally sustainable choices, especially when it comes to energy consumption, for example, and so on. And of course, for every system to be efficient, it needs to be technically robust and safe. It needs to be reliable and valid. And of course, it also needs to respect data and data governance and privacy issues. So all of these considerations and requirements should be taken into account whenever we use any of the systems we presented in our examples. What we are doing in these guidelines is we are helping teachers not only identify the examples and take into account the key considerations I mentioned. In these key considerations, we have added self-reflection questions that the teachers can actually ask themselves in order to understand, am I doing this in a fair, non-discriminatory manner? Is the system I'm selecting technically robust? We have included a lot of questions that can actually help teachers somehow self-reflect on their choices and make them justified. This is why the guidelines are a plan for effective use of AI and data in schools. They help a teacher from the very first step until the very end to self-reflect on their choices, select a system, introduce it in the school setting, carry out pilots, collaborate with all stakeholders, parents, administrators, policymakers from the ministries, and then monitor the operation of the tool if the AI system is actually adopted. Of course, we are also including information on how to raise awareness and community engagement so that any concerns and risks and fears are addressed properly in a very sound and reliable manner, especially when it comes with working with AI systems in underaged school settings. And of course, we also identified the emerging competencies teachers, students, parents need to develop in order to make justified and good choices and make good use of the AI systems. Some of them, for example, include the professional engagement and time, the digital resources, the empowerment of the learners, and so on. You can read more about the guidelines. You can also download them. They are available in all languages of the European Union. We have translated them. And in case you cannot really find them in the publication office, or you have any further questions, you may also send us an email on our functional mailbox, EAC Digital Education, and we will be happy to address any concerns or any questions you might have. So I will open the floor to any questions you might have. Let me also stop the presentation.
Thank you, Maria. Yes, all participants, please do write questions either in the Q&A section or directly in the chat if that is more easy for you. Now that we have Maria here, you have a very good opportunity to pick her brain and search for the answers that you need. This was a very well constructed presentation to what I'm sure is a very complicated topic, as we all know. And this was really concise. I do have a couple of questions, but first I would give the floor actually to Veronica. We've been in these digital dialogues, we've been trying out the format that we have our guests ask questions from each other, which is interesting, especially if their expertise overlaps, as is happening now. So Veronica, I would give you the floor first.
Thank you. Well, actually, I also have several questions, but I will stick to one for now. And I will make it practical because guidelines are about being practical. So the question is, in this concept of hopes and concerns, what do you think should be the next steps so they don't stay guidelines on paper? So we make sure that the educators actually get to use them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the main issue is to have a dialogue with all the member states and explore their intention and their willingness to support the integration of AI in education. You all know that sometimes technology goes faster than policy. So in that sense, many teachers have already started using AI tools, not only generative AI, but also other tools. So we really need to discuss with the member states and develop national strategies on the use of AI in education. I can already tell you that there are 3 member states that are highly advanced on this topic, and they are already about to publish their national strategies, which is very interesting, of course, to us. And we work very closely in order to learn more. I think that teachers need a solid legal framework that will also cover them in case things get out of hand. But they also need a national strategy on behalf of their governments that will somehow steer them to specific tools that we as a commission cannot intervene or can even name. As you can understand, I'm not naming any tool. So I think that they need a lot of support from member states on how to select a tool, centralized sometimes, or even on a regional level. They need the legal framework for us. And of course, we all need to be in an open dialogue. This is why we encourage even teachers, not only stakeholders that are on a higher level, to send us an email every time they have a question and a concern. We need to stick together, all of us, and have a sincere dialogue at any moment. So considering that the Commission is bound by subsidiarity and we cannot interfere with education curricula, what we can do is always be present with legal and ethical frameworks and let's say encourage member states to develop strategies that will give concrete examples and toolkits for teachers. Sometimes you can say that this is a ready-made material, but on the other hand, especially when something is new, perhaps we can start with something that is ready-made and then let creativity take its course.
I think that's a very good answer. I feel like this whole topic of AI is, again, very, very complicated, and I think it's much more complex than what we see in public discussion in general. I mean, in regards to education, examples I've seen in the last weeks and last months are about especially US-based examples of generative AI and how that's used by students to kind of cheat, right? So this kind of public discussion around cheating and how they're used to generate text, for example, so that you get off easier, right? And then what's merged now, at least in a lot of my spheres, is that educators are trying to combat that by using those same tools to check whether something is generated by AI, and it's far from reliable at the moment. So people are saying that I've gotten a mark or I've been failed because the teacher is saying that I am using AI to generate this, even if I'm writing it myself. So this is a really problematic bag of tricks, and it's of course super complex. My question to you would be in relation to the DigComp Edu framework. If I'm looking at it, there are these three main categories: are professional competences, what I see as kind of this internal perspective, then the pedagogic competences, which relates to the training itself, and then the learners' competences, which is of course looking into the future and seeing what learners need to eventually learn about AI, for example, or what implications there are. So my question to you would be, what comes to your mind, Maria, if you think of these three categories, what is the central implication that AI has in these areas? So internally, pedagogically, and also in terms of learners' competences.
Mm-hmm. Well, we do realize that generative AI is somehow developing new skills and competencies for all of the categories you mentioned. It's developing new skills and competencies for teachers, for students, and for all stakeholders and institutions. But on the other hand, it's also somehow, let's say, speeding up the process of losing other skills and competencies. So what we really need to redefine is the way we view learning, teaching, and assessment, in my opinion, at least. Over the decades, we have noticed that many of the learners cannot really justify why they need to learn something. Do you learn just to get a degree? Is it just a piece of paper? And the teachers, why do you teach this? Is it because someone told you from the ministry that this is a curriculum? So if you start somehow to ask these very difficult questions, you might get uncomfortable answers. But on the other hand, I think that generative AI is somehow pushing us to start questioning our choices and how justified they are in this more digitalized era. Some choices have been made decades ago and they are not justified anymore. So in that sense, I think what we need to do is to reconsider our choices and start changing the curriculum towards something that is more useful, practical, but also resonates more with what is happening in our everyday life. On the other hand, this is for ministries, let's say institutional competencies. On the other hand, I think teachers will really need to reflect a little bit on their practices and assessments. Is it really useful to ask someone to prepare an assignment of 1,000 words, take it, read it, grade it, and give it back? Why is it useful for the learner? Why is it useful for the teacher? Can you really draw conclusions from 1,000 words about a person's competences, knowledge, and abilities? Maybe teachers should also redefine what they want to test and how they want to test it. And even so, do you really want to test it or just have an overview of things? Is it testing per se the word? Very important. And of course, for learners, I think learners should really reflect, do I want to learn anything? Why do I need to learn something? This is, something that happened when we had the first calculator. People said maths is dead now because the calculator can actually calculate everything for you. But, mathematics is actually a competence that you really need to have. It's not that a calculator actually abolished mathematics. In the same sense, I also see generative AI as something that will make us reconsider who we are and what we are doing and why, and we will develop new competencies. As to what you mentioned about the teacher trying to figure out who is the cheater and so on, I think that this will somehow bring them to a dead end, and they will have to revise their practices anyway, either more brutally and forcefully or more graciously if we talk with the ministries and they revise their curriculum and strategies. It's very complicated, actually, but it will lead to some difficult realizations, I think, for all of us.
Yes, definitely. And we had in our event that ended just today, we had yesterday a keynote from Katri Saarikivi from Helsinki University, and she was talking about what impact AI in different forms will have on humanity itself, like our cognitive abilities, how we think, how we learn, all of this stuff. So it's a really, really interesting topic. There is one question in the Q&A section, and that's more of a systemic one. So the question is, see. The approach, this approach considers so far mostly the users of AI-based offers. So what about regulations targeted at the producers of AI? So how does that regulation go?
This is a very interesting question, and the Commission is actually working on this. As I mentioned initially in the PowerPoint presentation, we already have a set of about 6 to 7 acts, and we are also waiting for the AI Act. The Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act mention a lot of things and have a lot of specifications and requirements about the producers of these AI systems. The AI Act also includes a lot of guidelines, but not guidelines actually, it's going to be a law, which means it's going to be compulsory. It includes a lot of articles in this legislation about producers and how they should prepare or how they should inform us about their AI systems. All of this, along with GDPR, the Data Act and the Data Governance Act, will not only try to regulate the user, but they will also try to regulate the market, the products, and how the products are used. So I would expect that when the AI Act is finally adopted, we will have a comprehensive package of all of this. Of course, you know that we all need to read them extensively and we all need to understand them. At some point in the Commission, we are also exploring the option of making these laws and this package of laws more comprehensive and user-friendly for people to have it as a guide, as a day-to-day guide, including education. This is something we are already discussing to make it more friendly for the user. We were going to have regulations. You know, the problem is that you cannot really ban everything, ban all systems. This would kill innovation and this will bring us in a sort of medieval dark ages. We don't want that, but we want to somehow regulate it and also raise awareness on the people on how to use it. We have a justified choice, human agency. We can use it to do something malicious or we can use it towards our benefit. We really need to gain more skills, as you mentioned, Juha, earlier on this, and learn how to work towards benefiting ourselves, not work against us. So yeah, we have a lot of regulations and more are coming up.
Yeah, thank you. I see a question that is really NA specific there in the chats. I will leave it for later because I would propose that we now switch over to Veronica and look at her side of the research and then take all of these questions also in the end. So keep them in mind and keep them coming in the chat. So now I would leave the floor to Veronica for the next 20 or so minutes, please.
Hi, thank you, Juha. Thank you all for having me today. I'm a bit in a different position than Maria because I'm indeed a researcher and I have worked with the partnership, the youth partnership between the EU and Council of Europe. But nevertheless, I am an expert in the field, so I will have a big disclaimer here. And that is whatever I say, it's also sometimes my idea. So do not, let's say, I do not bind the institution with what I say, but I also have a bit more freedom. So also feel free to ask whatever you want. I will be more than happy to comment and offer at least my perspective in the field of a person working for about 17 years in the youth sector and almost a decade on these issues related to digital transformation and digital policies. And I think it connects very well with how Maria ended her last responses related to the many pieces of legislation and policies that are coming up. Because this topic about youth participation and artificial intelligence, it's really about that, among many other things, of course. So here we are trying to connect the dots. And of course, sometimes it is a question, why this discussion now? And obviously I give my own answer to this, why not any sooner? Because I think it's already so clear that AI-powered technologies have been massively used more and more. And I think the pandemic brought this explosion and enthusiasm at some point, at least to try tools, even if we are not that proficient in using them. And of course, nowadays, and I saw the questions about ChatGPT, there's a lot of hype around AI, and I think an increased hype around AI governance, and not just here in Europe, but at the global level. And it started a lot last year. It increased even more this year, but obviously this is something that has started many years ago. Not that many, but more than the last 2 years. And Maria was mentioning what the European Union is doing. The Council of Europe is also doing a lot in the field. It has been working, while the EU is expected to be the first legally binding legislation in the field of AI, probably setting the standards and as an example for the world. Council of Europe is also working in drafting a convention on AI and its connection to human rights and rule of law. And of course, it's not just this. And here I am happy to be working with the EU Council of Europe Youth Partnership, which is trying to do something we all need in the youth and educational sector, and that is to close this knowledge gap between AI as a more technical field and youth sector as a more obviously educational and social sector. And it's not something necessarily new, even if AI has not been used so much in the past as a terminology, as we have been talking about digital transformation or smart policy, smart education, smart youth work. But at least since 2019, more and more studies have been appeared. And I'm happy to be here with one of the studies we have just published, and together with another one that my colleague Alicia has been working, automating youth work reviews on AI, which you will have the chance to explore, and I will not present today. They're already published, and you can actually fully browse after the meeting. So let's get practical and dive into the study. Well, I think this was the main question when we started talking about youth participation in AI. What is actually AI and what is youth participation in AI? And needless to say, there is not one single AI technology we're talking about. There is not one single AI governance process. There is not obviously one way of how young people participate. And this is really important for us to understand that we are still in a new field. The technology is developing. Whatever we were discussing about as a hype last year, it's different now. The definitions change as well. So what is an AI technology? And also these processes that are being just shaped up. And what irony is it that sometimes we expect educators, youth workers, or even young people to be able to navigate this maze. And in response to this, let's say, challenge that we are all facing, this was the start for the study, because we need to understand where we are, and that was the aim, to have an overview, to understand what is the impact for the youth sector, what are the challenges, opportunities, or the positive, the negatives, everything together. What is the agency of young people? Let's not forget, young people are the biggest share of internet users, of technology and devices users. It doesn't matter, it's just in educational context or just for their home, for fun at their home. And some exploratory work has been done on the topic. And I remember when we started discussing about it in 2019 with the Youth Department of the Council of Europe, it was a question, are we legitimate enough to bring this topic if it's not so popular yet, right? So if it's not a strong demand on that. And that's what we are also going to address and see through the study. Because, well, first of all, let's get out of the way the definitions. I'm not going to mention them. They are referred in the study. There are different definitions on AI. We have used the one in the Council of Europe, but whenever I will mention AI, is more of a general umbrella term. So, it's not just facial recognition, it's not automated decision making, it's not ChatGPT. There are all the different algorithms and different forms of technology. Either they're more complex, more autonomous, because that's not the point. We use AI because it has different forms, and while there is still a lot of negotiation which definitions to be used, there is a clear way of how we can look at it. One technology that is a bit more powerful than a basic technology where you have an input and an output. So it has some capacity to analyze information, to create predictions or assess risk sometimes. The idea of governance, and of course I think I will not go here, but probably the one that I will stick, it's not the one underlined, is the one where governance refers to the norms, values, and rules of the game through which public affairs are managed in a manner that is transparent, participatory, inclusive, and responsive. So the participation is, in a way, synonym to governance, or the structures through which we can participate. And youth participation, obviously, the definition we are all friendly with because it's referenced in many documents, from Council of Europe to the SALTO participation information strategy, youth strategy, and so on and so forth. Connecting the sectors. So why is it relevant for the youth sector? Well, for many things that you have already guessed, and Maria has also explained, but I think essentially we are talking about the two approaches. AI is everywhere, but we do need to have a balanced approach about it. Because on the one hand, AI is an enabler, as technologies can bring positive effects and augment the quality of life, and that's not something we can deny. But AI at the same time is a challenge and potentially can create harm and negatively impact fundamental rights. And probably this is something a bit newer, because in terms of opportunities, we have explored with the guidelines a bit earlier on how it could be applied in the AI, in the educational field. And of course, we have the assistive solutions that have been around for quite a time. Some of the AI technologies already deployed in the youth services. So I'm not spending so much time on the opportunities during today, and mostly because, and this is a very personal note, opportunities have been much more discussed, even if I have to be honest, sometimes we struggle finding those sufficiently practical solutions, applications that we can take, and put in the youth service, in the programs we offer for young people. And I think another issue that we should all be aware of, if everything had been so wonderful with the AI technologies and we should always be happy about them, then probably we wouldn't need to change anything. And since that is not the case, we have to address AI as a challenge as well. And right now, I think it's an increasing situation where we notice the negative impact on social rights, or potential negative impact, because we still have some research but not sufficient evidence to support all these situations. But the situation in use cases where we have seen that AI systems that have been applied in employment, recruiting staff, in education, grading or evaluating to the grades, or forecasting to which schools young people should go based on their grades, policing technologies, so the tools that a police officer would use in order to decide to which extent a potential offender can create more harm in the future, for example. Or the so-called social credit scores, which probably in Europe we are not that familiar because they have been mostly implemented outside Europe, but there have been cases in Europe as well. There is extensive literature on all these use cases. What is behind all these technologies and use cases where AI has produced some negative impact is mostly linked to what is known today bias. And that is the result that is produced through the use of AI is creating more discrimination, more inequality. And I do have to underline something. It's not that some evil mind, right? And this is in the line of personal notes. There is no evil intention necessarily when all these technologies are deployed. Sometimes they're involuntary. But it is another thing, and it is a fact. AI is based on data. The data that is collected and is used ultimately to make decisions, because that is one of the cases when such technologies create harm, is based on real data. Data that in our society has been based on historical inequalities. Inevitably, the output is still a bias, a prejudice. So that has been discovered during the different use cases I've mentioned and many others. And this is also the turning point, why we need to care about participating in AI governance in general, why there is a role for educators, youth workers, and young people to engage in how such technologies are developed, are deployed, and eventually how are monitored. Now, there's another thing. It's not that these technologies are so clearly visible. Unfortunately, many times they are used without us being aware. So that's also a strong infringement on the individual rights of not being aware of what's happening around you. And of course, there are many other impacts when we talk about AI, either it's related to the future work. And I think especially for young people, it's of particular importance. If AI is supposed to replace a lot of low-skill jobs, probably young people will be the most impacted. AI and data privacy, AI and mental health, especially for those working with young people, understanding that there are algorithms that always shape the way they understand life, the way they interact with society, mostly through social media or other online platforms, it should be really relevant because it really impacts, and there is more and more evidence coming showing that young people and even children have other more advanced problems that they have to face related to body image, depression, or even suicide. And this is the point we are getting to, because at the end of the day, as professionals working with young people or supporting the youth sector, we face this paradox of the either or. Are the technologies good? Are the technologies bad? And this is the coin we have to understand. There is a coin with two faces. There are benefits, but there are also challenges. The same technology can create both. And I think ChatGPT is one of the examples, and the study brings it as an example and a small study case, because it's really an enabler, but also as a challenge. And I think 1 year ago when we started this research, ChatGPT was not even on our radar because nobody was talking about ChatGPT, because ChatGPT didn't have the power that it has today. So that is, I think, one clear example of how we can see there is some good and there is some challenge behind it. And I think one conclusion is just this. We cannot just embrace technology, because it's amazing and it's cool. Even though we should not be afraid of it, we should not be afraid of integrating it meaningfully, but we should also not fear it mindlessly, just because we have heard something that could happen and might be negative. But on the contrary, embrace it responsibly. This is the trigger probably that should make us at least discuss more and more how do we understand technology, but how we shape technology and the policies around this technology. And we get to this governance dimension, because I say here winter has come. Yes, maybe there is some darker perspective here, but it's not just about AI, it's about how we have shaped so far the world of AI. Because the study is, at least, and you will have the chance to explore it in length, an overview of the existing AI processes, the different structures and spaces where AI is developed and where policies are developed, but also is looking at the youth dimension, right? So to which extent young people had the opportunity to shape those policies. What are the documents in the youth and educational field that connect the two, that at least mention AI and digital as some important core topics? And then, well, at a glance, I can say this: young people are not really at the table of the discussions. And even in the documents and policies that have been created about AI, civil society as a whole had a really minimal role. And the Council of Europe has a very interesting tool where you can visualize all sorts of initiatives. And in November last year, from about 20 to 30 documents created by civil society organizations, none were coming from the youth sector. Now, what I can tell you, really in a nutshell, because the study explores it at length, there are really many national policies that develop and shape AI, right? So it can be AI on loan or AI in digital. So we tend to have this boost, of course, in the European Union, but also outside of the European Union. And there are, as I was saying, not just one AI governance process, but four, because there are four institutions that have started this understanding. How do we govern AI? How do we ensure that all those ethical principles are respected? And we have the UN system. UNESCO had an important role over there and created some important documents, the OECD, the Council of Europe, and of course the EU. But then, while looking really in detail through all these processes, the main stakeholders who were really engaged in developing them, but both from public and private sector, were mostly representatives of the technology sector experts, a lot of experts, representatives of academia, especially higher education, and really no or really marginal role to civil society or youth groups and educational stakeholders at large. And to be honest, there was another thing where I looked that was with all these companies that create technology and that actually target young people as their audience, how many do engage young people in one form or another, maybe through an advisory board. So far, there's really no evidence that someone is doing it. And now, because I need to breathe, and I'm not sure how I'm doing in time, I will invite you to explore the study, because so far I can only say that in all the 4 international contexts, it's just the Council of Europe who has given a specific role to the youth sector, even though in a consultative position. All the others have really this expert approach where governments, representatives of governments, academia, and the industry are the most important ones, if not the only ones involved. And of course, the study brings also other examples, because what we discover, and here I would like to spend a little bit more time on the challenges, limitations, but also opportunities, and that is this different role of traditional youth organizations. We have been so used that youth councils, youth umbrellas, different levels would always voice the needs of young people, speak on behalf of the rights of young people. Yet in these processes, we notice that they have been really absent. And that's something we should be concerned of. And I think probably for you as national agency officers, it's really important to understand that while there have been many initiatives supporting skills for young people, how to become more digitally competent, participating in these digital processes has not been something on the public agenda of youth organizations or other youth stakeholders. And these formal spaces being so expert-centric, they didn't really leave a leeway for others who were less experts to voice their opinions. And last but not least, there's still a lot of understanding to be done on the impact of AI. Right now, we have some studies, we have some understanding, but more is needed, and more is specifically needed for the youth sector, for the impact on youth rights. And because I do want to have a balanced approach, and there are many challenges, but there are also many opportunities, there are some proposals through the study that we have explored, because much more can be done. And all the shortcomings can be transformed into opportunities. And there is a lot that can be done on competence building, and that's both for youth workers and young people. And there's a lot of momentum that can be gained because there are all these AI policies or AI processes that are running. And so there is still a time for you stakeholders to get engaged. There is even a stronger moment to amend the existing policies in the youth sector. Either it's the European Youth Strategy, either it's the European Youth Programs, Erasmus Plus or Solidarity Corps. With the midterm evaluation coming up, these priorities such as youth participation, AI governance, or literacy on AI can be stronger emphasized. And there's also another stronger need on cooperation with local and national authorities. And there's another trick to this. We call this, I was mentioning before, AI. But AI has different forms, different technologies. So it might happen that AI is not regulated in a council for AI, but in a council for smart cities, for Internet of Things, for smart education. So this cooperation really can be strengthened. And there is another point here that I call potentially a new curriculum for citizenship. Understanding technology and how it shapes our realities and our human rights, it's something that can be reflected and should be reflected as well. So it's a lot of potential things that can be done. So moving forward, you can further discover the section in the study on recommendations for stakeholders, because we are proposing a lot of dimensions on how to deal with both the challenges and opportunities already mentioned. But essentially, we're talking about democratizing AI. You know, from a technical field, really expert-based, to more popular culture, where everyone has a minimum understanding of what is AI, where they can find it, and what is the impact. Develop digital critical literacy. It goes in the line with that either-or paradox. And that means we need to be open to technology, but also embrace it with a critical mind. And then cooperation, cooperation, cooperation. I think, at least in the world of European youth programs, this is key. So that's it from my side. Thank you. You have here all the resources I could find from the studies I have contributed to the sections of the Youth Partnership on AI, the Council of Europe on AI, the Declaration on Youth Participation in AI Governance, the Participation Resource Pool from SALTO. So I hope to count on your questions. That's it.
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you for a very concise and lively presentation as usual. Before I give the first question again to Maria, I will say to all participants, do keep the questions coming. I saw that there is discussion already in the chat. And what we will do is we will get a couple of questions first that are more for a general audience. And because the final Q&A will not be recorded, we will talk about the internal national agency perspective there. And you can then also, who are participating live, you can turn on your cameras. But so the first question I would give to Maria, please.
Yes, I will start by thanking you, Veronica. I am also a PhD candidate in the field of AI in education. And as I was listening to your intervention, I could come up with so many topics for research. So on a personal tone, I was very fascinated by your intervention. As you can imagine, I also have a lot of questions. It's a shame that we can't really meet for a physical coffee and a chat. But I would like to ask something very concrete in relation to what you mentioned about the participation and engagement of youth people. I actually have two questions, if it's possible. About the participation, so far the European Commission has committed itself to having the forums, Year of Youth, discussions and so on. But as you also mentioned, you feel that some of them are not effective ways of engaging the audience, or the representatives that actually attend in these events do not represent the largest amount of people. So if you had one suggestion to the Commission about how to improve the communication and collaboration with the youth, what would that be?
Thank you, Maria. The easy questions, the easy solutions. Yeah, I know this is a really complicated issue, because what happens here, and this is something we have had in different expert discussions as well. It was, just this research that we did, and they came and said, we do not necessarily feel we are prepared for these discussions. We do not feel we are competent enough. We don't feel we have a mandate to discuss this. So it's obviously a very difficult way of how to solve it, because I don't think there is one way. On the one hand, and this is really my personal opinion, I think there should be still a concern to discuss directly with the entities that are usually established around youth representation. I mean, we cannot ignore them. I think it would be a good timing to look also at the new movements, because right now you don't necessarily have what is called the youth-led structure necessarily dealing, with the rights in the digital space or related to AI and human rights. They're really like new structures that are just being created or supported. So a little bit of awareness, I guess, in that direction could be the case. I don't have a magic solution, I have to say. I don't have, unfortunately, the one solution that could happen, but being a bit more open to other structures is a beginning. And another thing, and it's also included in my recommendations, we need to support to create these kind of networks that advocate for these topics. I think we are in a moment where it's strange. Technology is happening, policy is happening, but the structures that could be, really affected by them are not present. So we have to create the space. And I think for that matter, this is the perfect space to discuss this, because national agencies through the programs could have really a great opportunity to prioritize it and to also promote these kind of, possibilities. And it's a grassroots movement that we need more and more probably as well. Yeah, so sorry for not being it.
No, this is very exciting, because you are actually giving me an idea as I hear you respond to the question. that you could actually have a dedicated channel on the hub if you decide many of the youth organizations to join the hub. As we created out of nowhere, without even planning it ahead, a network of national advisory services within the hub, just because it was like a grassroots demand coming from the bottom. We could have something similar from the youth organizations if we see enough interest in the hub. So maybe I would actually like to invite you and other representatives from youth organizations to start joining the hub and making their presence known to us so that we can explore these possibilities as well. We already have an example like this, so why not explore another one? Just an idea. Juha, do you think we have time just to ask one more question? Would that be okay for you?
That would be very much okay. I will just add to what you said just now. If you do want to draft an invitation for people to join that conversation, SALTO Digital is happy to also use our networks to hand out that information for youth actors. So it might be an interesting starting point.
I will start discussing internally, considering that I'm leading the action on AI, but I'm assisting the action on Hub and NAS, as you know. So I will explore internally and come back to you on this. And the second question is something that we are also concerned, and though initially it was not one of the 14 actions of the Digital Education Action Plan, we started gradually to work on this. It relates to digital well-being. There is a definition, of course, of well-being by the European Union. It relates, just to mention briefly, it relates to a person's satisfaction on a mental, emotional, physical, social, and interpersonal level. The degree of satisfaction it has on these five, let's say, aspects. So you mentioned a lot about mental health and mental well-being, and this is something that we are gradually concerned with. So I wanted to ask you if there is any study or any other, I don't know, resource that you could actually share with us on mental health among the youth, especially related to digital aspects.
There are studies on this. I mean, I know several of them on the
not academic ones, let's say from organizations or
but here in German we talk about mental health and how algorithms or the use of social media is impacting mostly. Because I think these were the topics most explored.
Social media, dating apps, TikTok, I think all of them are starting to change the way people feel about themselves and the way they interact with other people. So on the digital world, we really need to investigate this even further. As an organization, like an institution, we still don't have a formal study on this. This is why I was just asking if you know of any other international organization that is working on the topic.
I will be happy to share what I have with you, definitely.
Okay. Definitely. Thank you very much, Veronica. I think I will let the floor to our audience.
Yeah, I will selfishly ask one question, because you talk about engaging with these processes of AI governments and engaging with this public discussion. And that, of course, requires a certain set of competences. You have to, I know you talk about critical digital literacy and developing this kind of outlook to the whole thing. So do you think that it's possible for anyone to gain these competences if someone might feel that, okay, I don't know enough, so I can't engage? So is it possible for either an individual to start gaining these competences, or an organization to start gaining these competences so they can really actually take part as equal members in the conversation?
Well, that's a nice question, but I think it also makes it easy for me, because when we started this study, we started it with this need in mind. And, more than a study, it is meant to be some sort of roadmap for those who want to start their journey. It's not comprehensive enough, and probably, in order to navigate any of these processes right now, you need a special guidance. So once the EU adopts its AI Act, you need an entire guidance on what to do, at which level, at national, at European. Is it a certain body just the one you have to work with? But I think the study is really a great starting point for that, because this is what we were missing Instead of me doing my own investigation, learning who is doing what, that was it. It also allows you to see easily, what are the structures? Is it an expert group? Is it an AI alliance, for example, that the EU has? And there are different spaces and moments. There is not just one way of doing it. But there is also another point we addressed through the study, and that is there should be no fear to get engaged. We always have this feeling, and there is a reasonable concern from the youth organization that they're not competent enough. You will never be competent until you start, actually. It starts from something individual. It goes along with the organization getting a mandate that is talking to the young people they represent in order to understand. It goes to the third level where you have some evidence. So you collect cases of infringement on human rights and all these things, right? So I don't say it's easy, but what process of any form of participation is easy? But it is there, and it is definitely a good momentum. And there's another momentum where it's not just about the European or global policies that are being created. It's about the implementation. It's always there where there is more to do. And I think for that purpose, because now we are also talking with an NA audience, just as we are used to create all sorts of project labs, it could be nice to support also some project labs on this topic, on how young people participate to shape AI technologies or digital technologies, and that is one. And another one, how to shape the policies, because that's a different dimension. There are always two angles here. So yeah, I think that could be easily done. Just write that.
Thank you. Very good and kind of an answer that really encourages everyone to really participate. Before jumping into the questions regarding really NAs and national agencies internally, at this point, I will thank our audience watching the recording on YouTube and reiterate that next time we will be talking about digital inclusion. So the recording will end here, but our live audience, do not go anywhere. We will continue with our Q&A section. One moment. Thank you.